Okay, so in this video, just continuing with the same stuff in 4.1, except for now I'm going to calculate absolute extrema on a closed interval. So I'm just going to do one example like this because really the calculus part of this is going to be the same every time. So I'm going to get you the calculus steps. There are going to be prerequisite algebra skills that come into play. So you'll definitely want to make sure to do your homework and ask questions. So just keep in mind, the algebra is going to come back into play. Again, it shouldn't be too shocking at this point. Okay, so a general process for finding absolute extrema on closed intervals, okay, that's where the endpoints are included, is to first find all critical, I'm going to say critical numbers, so you can just find the x values first. I always find the y values in my end step. Okay, then you're going to find the y values of the critical, this should say numbers. Okay, then you're going to find the y values at the endpoints. So remember what we talked about before. Sometimes the endpoints can drop below those little peaks and valleys, which is why it's really important to make sure you check them to see if they happen to be lower or higher than your peaks and valleys that you find with that critical number or the derivative. Okay, now you know your smallest y value will be your minimum, the largest y value will be your maximum. So let's go through this process. My first step is going to be to find the critical number. So I guess I should give us a function to work with. For example, let's do this for, so find the absolute, max, and mins of f, so of some function f of x being equal to 5 plus 54x minus 2x cubed on the interval, so the closed interval, seeing I have brackets, from 0 to 4. All right, so step one, I'm going to find the critical numbers. This is going to be pretty much the same as what I did in the first two examples. So finding critical numbers, I have f prime of x, need to find that derivative first. Doing so, we'd have a 54 minus, let's see, 6x squared, right? I know that this isn't going to be undefined anywhere because it's a polynomial, so it's continuous, so I just need to focus on when this is equal to 0. Okay, to solve for x, I'm going to subtract the 54 and divide by a negative 6, which would get us to x squared equals 3. Taking the square root of both sides, we have x equals plus or minus 3. Okay, so from here, notice I have two solutions, positive and negative 3. Well, we need to take note, I already did, I'll underline it, that we do not need to examine the negative 3. So looking at our interval was from 0 to 4. Negative 3 is not inside of that interval. I don't have to worry about it. I don't need to examine it. What I do need to do is find the y values of the critical number, x equals 3, and the endpoint. So let's go through and look at our y values to see which ones are bigger and which ones are smaller. So let's see, I know one of my critical numbers that I actually wanted to use was x equals 3 from up here. So I need to find the y value that goes with that, which means I use the original function. So plugging that into my original function, I have 5 plus 54 times 3 minus 2 times 3 cubed. Let's see, if you run that through, I believe you should get 113. All right, next I need to plug in both of my endpoints to make sure that, or to see if they're taller or smaller than this critical point or this critical value was. All right, so I'm going to plug in 0. If I plug in 0 to the function like I just did, my y value is 5, and finally I need to plug in the 4. So if I plug 4 in, I would get the y value of 93. Okay, so this tells me that on this interval, our absolute max is, you could say, at x equals, let's see, 3, or you could say is, y equals 113. If it asks for the point, you'd get the point, etc. Our absolute min is at x equals 0, or we could say it is y equals 5. Okay, so like I said, some questions will get more complex with this, but if you keep those key steps in mind, it'll be okay. You'll just have to remember some algebra to go with it. So One other thing I want to note is in this, remember, I just didn't find when it's undefined because it happens nowhere. That doesn't mean that when you find absolute extrema, you should just skip that step. So obviously here it wasn't valid to do it, but you might find places where it is valid. Okay, thank you for listening, and please be sure to do your homework with enough time to ask questions.